Okay, the trial for Kyle Rittenhouse. It's been covered by the media pretty well, but there's one angle that I don't think a lot of people have considered, and I certainly haven't seen too many people talking about it. I haven't read any articles about it, but I want to talk about it. It's a very interesting irony in the American legal system. You are supposed to have a jury of your peers, and so Mr. Rittenhouse, through his attorneys, have tried to ensure that he has a jury of his peers. So they have kicked off as many potential black jurors as possible. So he has as few black people on the jury as humanly possible. Now, it could be a coincidence. But like 90-something% of their challenges to jurors have been to black jurors. And if that might be a coincidence, but if it's not, let's consider that the reason for that is because they want a jury of his peers. They want an all-white jury because he's white, because he identifies as white, so he wants people that look like they might identify as white on the jury. That's very important for him. Obviously, it's very important for his attorneys, or else they wouldn't have done it. The question is, in the calm of a jury room, where there's no violence going on, there's nothing urgent. In a jury room, you can sit there and talk for hours. There's no time limit. There's no one yelling at you, or there shouldn't be. There shouldn't be any threats. You're in a safe environment in a jury room. So the question is, in a jury room, do you think in that calm environment where all you're supposed to do is be logical and reasonable, do you think it's possible that racial bias could affect people's judgment? Do you think it could affect their judgment in a situation where there's nothing really exciting going on? And I suggest to you that whether you believe that racial bias exists or not, that Kyle Rittenhouse's lawyers do believe it exists. Kyle Rittenhouse's lawyers believe that there is such a thing as racial bias, and that even in a jury room where there's nothing exciting going on, that racial bias could affect his civil rights. Why is that ironic? It's ironic because in the state of Wisconsin, I suggest to you that it is impossible for a young black man to have a 90% black jury. So if you're black and in Wisconsin and you're charged with a crime, you're charged with murder or attempted murder or whatever, and you go to trial, your defense attorneys might like to have a jury of your peers, of all black jurors. And you might be concerned that racial bias would creep into the jurors' minds, and so you try to strike all the white jurors. But the problem is, if you believe that, it won't do you any good, because you will never be in a situation in the state of Wisconsin where you can have even a majority black jury. No matter how much you try, no matter how, you can use every one of your challenges on all white folks, you're still not going to have a majority black jury in the state of Wisconsin. This is not going to happen because of the demographics, because it's overwhelmingly white. Why is this ironic, though? Where's the irony, though? Well, the irony is that the protests that Rittenhouse was there to not support, I think that's fair to say. I think it's fair to say that Rittenhouse was not trying to support the protests in Kenosha, Wisconsin, right? He was not there to support the protests. Some would say that he was there to counter-protest in a way, that he was there to counter the people that show up to protest. Well, at the very least, he didn't agree with the protests. He didn't agree with the protesters. And the people that were protesting, they were protesting the concept of racial bias. Not in the calm of a jury room where there's no violence, there's no threat of violence. They were protesting the concept that there can be racial bias in a heated, very exciting moment of an arrest. If you pull someone over and you don't have the luxury of a jury room in a courthouse where you know everybody else is unarmed, is it possible that racial bias could creep into the situation in a pullover or in a heated exchange where time is of the essence and there's some urgency to it? Is it possible that your decisions, even though you'd like to be logical and rational, is it possible that racial bias exposes itself in those situations? And the protesters are there saying, yes, they believe. I believe that's what the protest, if you boil it down to its essence, those protesters were there to say, yes, not only do I believe racial bias exists, I believe that's exactly what happened with that black man in Kenosha, Wisconsin, that was shot and is now paralyzed. I believe racial bias crept into that situation. So the irony is that Rittenhouse and his supporters will probably tell you that there's no such thing as racial bias when it comes to police and black men. But there is absolutely racial bias when it comes to black jurors and a white defendant. Because I promise you, if we were to poll people, say, hey, I support Kyle Rittenhouse, I hope he's found not guilty, they're gonna say, yeah, he needs an all-white jury. And then when you push them a little further, say, hey, well, should a black person in Wisconsin be afforded an all-black jury? Well, it's not possible, so they're probably going to defend the status quo. I don't know. I'll leave that up to them to defend a little bit better. But I just think that's one of the great ironies. I'd love to hear people's comments on it.